I got that ground home. I was going to pull my hair out. I appreciate you guys being patient. Sorry about that. Somebody make it stop. I've heard 60 cycles for an hour and a half. Somebody seriously make that stop? It's going to be like being in an anechoic chamber after this. They can't even hear me. Whatever. You throw something at them, Joy. So, kill that. Pretty please. She has no idea what we're talking about. This record, this record took up the greater part of 2 years of my life, and like I was saying before it started, it represents three of my primary interests of study since I was a child, and just three things that keep me getting out of bed in the morning. One of which is classical music that I've studied since I was a kid, and a lot of these songs follow a classical structure, typically sort of sonata type form, where there's a statement of a theme, a variant of a theme, and the third movement being a recapitulation of the theme, and then there's micro movements within those three movements. Some of them follow five movement sort of structures, but there's a lot of classical form and harmony, and also too some very sort of traditional string writing. You've probably heard the big orchestral part in the middle of the Antikythera mechanism, which is the fifth track, and so that is like a predominantly featured part of this body of work. And the second piece being my interest in math and in building instrument design and coding, and just some cool little things that I kind of want to yell out when we're watching it, but it would be sort of inappropriate. Like in the third track, the internal locus, there's a part where, are there any musicians in the room? Okay, cool. So there's a part in the track that sounds like sort of granular synthesis about 3/4 of the way through, and it was really sort of wide surround soundy granular type thing, and what that actually is a fractal of the entire composition. So I've taken the whole piece and pared it down into 4 bars. So everything that is rhythm per se has become micro rhythm. Some of the 8th note, quarter note figures have become 1024th note and 2048th note figures. So it is actually it is actually a fractal of the entire composition. And then in the fifth piece, 1.618, that entire piece is based on the relationship of 3 to 2, which is, those of you that are interested in mathematics know as the golden mean. It's also referred to as the Fibonacci sequence, has many names, and it's something that, as a species, we find aesthetically pleasing, from the archways in cathedrals and mosques to the relationship of our forearm to our full arm, and our eyes to our head, and the way the Milky Way plots as a graph, being a Fibonacci sequence, or the way a fern unfurls naturally. It's a relationship that some people call God's fingerprint. It's something that just magically pops up all over the place, and it's a really beautiful and interesting relationship. Venus and the moon, their orbital relationship to us, and it appears everywhere. So that entire piece is based on that relationship, both the visual and the audio. It's expressed in the harmonic relationships in the piece, and the rhythmic relationships and melodic relationships. Another little bit about this sort of cool math coding type stuff. I set a goal for myself a couple years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago now. I build a lot of my own instruments in code, and also to actually physically build instruments. I'll talk about that later too if anybody's interested. The first piece is actually written, it's scripted, so there's no synthesis and no real instruments per se in the first piece. It took me about 6 months to write that piece, and it's written in command line. It's about 200 pages of code, and so it never touched a mixing board. There's no keyboards on it. Each one of those instruments I built by hand, and then I scripted how they would be played. And actually the piece itself, too, the visual piece is scripted as well, too. So the entire thing is written in code. And that was a ridiculous hurdle that I set for myself and somehow managed to get over in 6 months. A final thought on kind of the math and coding aspect of this record is about 2 years ago I started a small software company, and when I say small, one of my programmers is standing in the room with you right now, right here, Choi. He's working the camera, so we sit around my kitchen table. There's like 3 of us and write software, so double duty is many things. So we started this little software startup and actually built a drum machine. And every beat that you hear on this record is created in my drum machine, which is called Break Tweaker. And it took about 2 years to make as well, and close to 800,000 lines of code. It's the first surround sound drum machine. So all these moving, crazy, glitchy, 512th notes splining down into 8th note triplets exponentially over a dotted quarter note. All that kind of stuff was only achievable in this machine, and we actually had to build something to do it. So there's nothing commercially available that could do that. So that was a big ass project. Forgive me, my mom's here. So as a final thought, the last sort of, the third thing that features very predominantly in this body of work is jazz, and you can hear that a lot especially in dynamic symmetry, but it also it recurs throughout the record. In that when I write music for a score is the only time you really get to sort of spread your wings, so to speak, and write in things that aren't in 4/4. And also too in a film, it might be somebody running to, I said this the other night, turn on a light switch, and so you get to put in a bar of 7/8. But typically, directors and even audiences can be confused by what we call asymmetrical meter from jazz, anything not sort of in 4. And I come up with a lot of melodies and chord progressions in my head that aren't in 4/4. And this is the first time I ever decided to say, okay, that rhythm or that melody is in, like, take the internal locus, for example, it alternates between 3 bars of 13/8, 1 bar of 15/8. And then the second movement's in 7/4, and then the final movement is in 9. And it's typically something, if I was working on a record, obviously would have one of my normal records, whatever that is now, would have a vocal, and so you would compress it into 4/4, and instead in this I decided to let asymmetrical meter be and let the pieces retain the integrity of how they came, the form they came to me in, and there's a lot of isorhythms too. You really hear that in C on the other side, which is the 6th piece, where you have these phrases that it's kind of like a canon, but it overlaps wrong, if that makes sense, where you have these phrases that have their own rhythms. That's what they call it, isorhythm. And so these things loop improperly, so you get this constantly shifting and changing rhythmic foundation to the piece. So anyway, that's a lot about what this record is about, and more than anything, though, this record is the first 7 compositions that my daughter got to hear me write. So more than anything, this is a record for her. This is the experience of being a new father, and it's really like 7 lullabies for my little girl. She sat on my lap for the bulk of the time that I wrote this record, and that profoundly affected this body of work. So that's what this is, and I'm excited to answer questions about it because there's so much to talk about this record, because there's a ton of thought put into everything on it. It's been so the OCD in me, it's been way overthought. So anybody got any questions?